accessing ACEITLab for the first time and setting up 70-740 lab setup. Initially, when you log into ACEITLab.com, this is the interface that you'll see. You're going to use as your username your personal email address as listed in Focus, and by default, initially, your default password will be password, and that is a capital PA11WORD. Once you've used that and logged in, we're going to go through the steps for you to customize your password and your display name. So first off, I'm going to put in my username, and then I will type in my password, which I've already changed, but I'm going to do this to illustrate the login process. When you first log in, this is what your screen will look like. In the upper right, where mine says Lab Instructor, yours will simply show your email address. If you click on that name, you'll be able to customize it with your first and last name. Please do so, then click Save. Once you've done that, I want you to set a password of your choosing so that only you know what the password is to access your lab environment. Once you type the password in and verify it by typing in the same password in to confirm, click Change. Once you've done that, you'll be back to your lab environment, which is still empty. However, now your name will be displayed in the top right. At this point, what you want to do is you want to select 70-740. That's CTS00240 70-740. And click Copy to My Labs. Now we have a lab environment that we can work with. However, we're still not ready to use it. Notice the dark green background. By clicking on the Activate button in the upper left, this will make your lab active and the only one that you can utilize for this course. If we wait just a few moments, the screen will refresh and you will see the background change to a lighter green. There it is. Now, once we're done with all of our exercises in 70-740, what we will do is we will come back up, and don't do this, but at the end of our textbook for 70-740, we'll select Deactivate, and once our screen turns back to that dark green, we will have an option to delete. As the button's grayed out right now, we'll have an option to delete that lab and then select a new lab. So at this point, we're ready to begin working in our environment. Well, almost. These 4 servers need to get set up. And like with any environment, we need to have some way to be able to log on, to be able to control the access for our network. If this was our home network, we would have to have something, a router, a switch, something that connected our devices together. Well, we've already got that underlying structure built, but we're creating a Windows network. We're going to be creating a domain controller. That's the LUN DC1. That will be the heart of our network. And then we're going to have 3 member servers, LUN SVR1, SVR2, and SVR3. So let's begin by selecting the On button for LUN DC1. You'll see the little swirly going, and now you can see the title bar has changed to that same green color, showing that it's turned on. Let's go to the console. You can see we've switched now to the interface for our server. This is the first startup of this server. So it's going through a setup process just as if you had placed a DVD in the drive and we're going to install the software. However, this is going to work a lot faster. This is only going to take a few minutes and we'll have a fully operational server. So while it goes through its startup process here, I'm going to pause the video and I'll come back once we're ready to log in, which should actually only be another 30 or 45 seconds. Okay, and it should be just about done. So it's actually been about a minute, but here we are. We're ready to log in. Now, how do we press Control Alt Delete? If we do that on our keyboard, it's going to lock our system. Right here in the middle, top of the screen, is our button, Control Alt Delete, that we're going to press. This is how we're going to log into our systems each time. Press the button, and there is our login prompt. Now, that same default password that you had the first time that you logged in to ACEITLabs is the same password that we're going to be using for all of our accounts, and that is capital P, lowercase a, 11, well, hold on, up there it is, 11, WORD, and press enter. So write that down. Our default administrator password for all we do in these labs will be capital P, lowercase a, the number 1, WORD. It's going to take a few moments while it creates the administrator account on the system. Now, when we work with Windows 10, we have a desktop, and that it gives us an environment to run applications, Microsoft Word, or perhaps a gaming environment, Adobe Reader, or Internet Explorer, Chrome browser, whatever it may be. We run applications, we run programs. Servers run services. So the first thing it does is it says, hey, we discovered there's a network. Do we want to be able to find it? Yes. We're going to go ahead and click yes. Windows Server doesn't just have an environment for you to work with. When Windows Server starts up, you're going to see Server Manager. It's still starting up, so we're going to let it finish. If we come down here, we can see the swirly still going. Eventually, Server Manager is going to start here. The first time we set a server up, it takes a little bit longer. But for example, yep, here comes Server Manager. So just bear with it. Server Manager is where we're going to access most everything we do on this system. Unless we want to go and run PowerShell, which we'll get into, or a command prompt, we're probably going to work in Server Manager. For example, if I want a command prompt, I would type in C, and here again, the computer's just starting up for the first time, so everything's still loading. OMM, and we're just going to be patient here. It's the first time that this is run, and then we could run a command prompt. So let's just bear with it. There's our command prompt. Okay? Actually, I hit it twice. If we wanted to run Windows PowerShell, we could simply just click Start, and here's PowerShell. And most of what we want to do is we want to right-click on that little tile, and we want to go to More and Run as Administrator. And this gives us full access to what we want to do. Now, what if we wanted to run command prompt as administrator? Well, we could click Start and type COMM, and we could right click on command prompt and say Run as Administrator, and there it is. Notice it says Users Administrator. That's our account. If you're ever logging into one of these servers and the command doesn't want to run correctly, we're running some type of command on our domain, take a look at this. Once we create our Windows domain, this prompt will say adatum, A-D-A-T-U-M. That's the name of the domain that we're going to be using. It'll say adatum.administrator. If it just says administrator, you're logged in as the local administrator. I'll illustrate this later. So here is our Windows Server environment. We're going to learn more about this as we go. But all of our tools, everything that we want to do, we can access from Server Manager. For example, if I want to install a new role or feature, or remove a role or feature, I would select Manage, and then select the correct option as far as what I want to do. I can manage other servers from this server. I can install roles or features on other servers from this server. I don't have to log into the other server as long as it's on and part of our domain. If I want to run a tool, I click Tools, and here are all the administrative command and consoles for the various services for us to utilize. But since this is the first time we've started this system, it's brand new out of the box. What you're going to do is you're going to select Local Server on the left-hand column. And here we can see all of our various settings. One of the first things we're going to do is, just in case we have to run Internet Explorer, we're going to click over here on the On, and we're going to turn it off. Now, you typically wouldn't do this on a production environment, that is a real live network, because you want to keep the most secure configuration possible. But since we're working in a test lab environment, we're going to go ahead and do this. Okay, so that's off. Now the next thing we want to do is we want to rename this computer. So we're going to click right here where it says work group or computer name. Either or takes you to the same thing. And here is that interface. To rename this computer or change this domain, click change. And we're going to type in lun-dc1. That'll be the name of this computer, this server. We're going to click OK. Now, when we rename a system, we need to restart it for it to take effect. There's our prompt. It says yes, and when we click close, we're going to get prompted. Do we want to restart now? Yes, we do. So I'm going to click restart now, and then I'm going to pause the video while it restarts. Okay, well, that didn't take as long as I thought. I went to grab a fresh cup of coffee, and we're already rebooted. So we're going to hit Control-Alt-Delete button at the top. We're going to go ahead and we're going to get logged back in with that default account. There we are, PA11WORD, remember that. And you can see we're working with an evaluation. It's good for 180 days. That's the one nice thing about server evals. They're good for 6 months. So our server manager, everything's already back up. Notice how much more quickly everything loaded this time. It's set up. It's got that set up in the configuration, and we're running a lot more efficiently. So we've renamed our computer. We turned off that Internet Explorer enhanced security configuration to make it a little bit easier to work with if we need to. The next thing we need to do is we need to configure our IP address. Understand that our computers at home, they get an IP address from DHCP. They get a dynamic address. We could have a different address every time, and our home computers would work fine. Our computers in our classroom would work fine with a dynamic address, but servers need to have a static IP address. You want a server to be able to be found in exactly the same place every single time that a system needs to access it. Servers get static IP addresses, just like routers get static IP addresses, switches get static IP addresses, wireless access points, your networking infrastructure gets static IP addresses. So we say, well, wait a minute, we've got 2 IP addresses on this. Let's take a quick look at our configuration. I'm going to click back to lab. That's in the upper left there. And I'm going to expand the configuration for each one of my servers. You'll notice that all the servers have a NIC that's assigned to the private network. That's our internal network. Our DC1, since in some of our exercises we may need to get some software from the internet, it has a second public interface. And then what we could do is we could create a shared folder, and we're going to do this. We're going to create a shared folder called software. And then it'll be available to all these other servers if they need a copy of that. It has a public interface. We need to identify which one is which on our domain controller, or what will be our domain controller. It's not a domain controller yet. We haven't done any setup yet. But first and foremost, we need to identify which one of these two adapters is which, because if we assign these their IP addresses for their private network, and we would inadvertently assign the private network IP address to the public interface, this system's not going to talk to the public interface, and it's not going to talk to the private interface because it'll be backwards. So let's take a look here. Private, and the MAC address ends with 00002D. Remember that. You're going to need to do the same. Identify that MAC address. We're going to go back. We're going to click on console. And right here where it says IP address assigned by DHCP, we're going to click, and it's going to bring up our network connections. Now I'm going to guess it's probably my first one, but never assume. Let's go ahead and right click on that and go to status, and then we're going to click details. And there is my 00002D. So this is my private network. I'm going to click close and close. I'm going to right click on that Ethernet connection, and I'm going to say rename. And we're going to rename it to private. Now I know the other one's my public, so I'm just going to hit the tab button, and I'm going to rename this one public and press enter. Now, everyone should have gotten a copy of our Hyper-V networking and Windows Server MOAC 70-740, 741, and 742 setup instructions. On page number 18, it shows the IP address configuration for all of our servers. So I'm going to right click the private, and I'm going to go to properties, and I'm going to double click IPv4. That's going to allow me to make a static IP address assignment for this server. My LUN-DC1, looking down that column where it says VM name LUN-DC1, I see that my private IP address for my DC is going to be 172.16.0.10. And my subnet that I'm going to be on is going to be a class B, which is what that 172.16 address should be. So all I got to do is hit tab. I am not going to give it a gateway. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to say, since this is going to be the domain controller for our domain, this needs to point to itself, because this is going to be running our DNS. This will be our DNS servers as well as our domain controller. So where do I get my DNS information? From myself, because I'm the DC, I'm the DNS server. We're going to point to the local loopback. Do you remember what a local loopback is? It talks to itself. And what's the IPv4 local loopback address? Yes, it's 127.0.0.1. So when we do this, since we're going to be running a DHCP server, if we need to look up something in DNS, it will look at your IPv4 configuration and say, hey, I'm the DNS server, I need to ask myself. Our other servers under preferred DNS server will point to our IP address for our domain controller, because that, here again, we'll be running DNS. They need to talk to us to ask for DNS. So we can click OK, and we can click OK. Now, this should have gotten a DHCP address assignment. Let's right click on the public interface and go to status and see what we've got. And we're going to click details. Yes, it did get. It got a NAT pub DHCP assignment. And see our DNS servers? We should be able to talk to the internet. But before we close this, we're going to do one thing. We're going to click disable. Because if we keep this enabled and we have connectivity to the internet, this could cause a disruption when we create our domains. So we only want to use this when we want to be able to download something from the internet. So for right now, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to click disable. So we can see it's disabled. Our private adapter is enabled. We can close our network connections now, and we'll be able to see that correctly assigned. And we are ready to start setting up our domain. Now, if this is the first time that you've ever set up a domain controller, that's fine. We're going to be doing this a number of times, but I want everyone to now click on Manage. This is how we add roles and features. We're going to select Add Roles and Features, and this is our installation wizard. And as I said, we're going to be doing this many times. You may have a lot of questions if this is the first time you ever set up a domain controller. Just roll through the steps with me and understand that we're going to be covering this in a lot more detail as we go through our various lessons. For now, we simply want to get a lab environment that's operational, that we can perform our learning within. Okay, so when you start the Add Roles and Feature Wizards, you get a little information screen. We just simply click Next. All the installations that we do will be role-based or feature-based. We're going to either install role or we're going to install a feature, one or the other. So simply click Next on the installation type. We are installing this on our DC1. We do have the ability that we could manage multiple servers. For now, we're only managing our single server, so we're going to click Next. And we are going to create a domain. We are going to install the Active Directory domain services. So let's go ahead and put a check mark there. And we also need to install the features that will allow us to manage it. So we're going to click Add Features. Now, as part of creating the domain controller, it will install the DNS server, but I'm just going to go ahead and I'm going to check that off anyhow and click Add Features. And as a third item, we're going to install our DHCP server and click Add Features. Now understand, were this a production network, I wouldn't be installing a DHCP server on my domain controller. My domain controller would be my domain controller, and that's all it would be. Let it work as efficiently as possible. Only install those specific roles and features that are required for that single server. This is part of making sure that we've hardened our servers, that we're not creating a greater attack surface for malicious users or hackers than necessary. Okay, enough of cybersecurity. We've got our 3 roles that we're going to install. We click Next. We're not doing any additional features right now. There are some features such as group policy management that's going to be installed as part of this installation. That's going to be necessary for us to do our job as a domain controller. We're going to click Next. On the ADDS screen, we're going to click Next. On DNS server screen, we're going to click Next. DHCP server screen, click Next. And here we can see a confirmation of the actions that are going to be taken of the roles and features that will be installed. We're going to go ahead and we're going to click Install. Now this is going to take a few minutes to install, so I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to pause the video while that installation takes place. Okay, well, the installation of our roles and our features, and associated features that is, has completed, but all that is just the installation of those roles and features. It's still not a domain controller. All we did was install those components. Now we need to promote this server to a domain controller and install the components to make this a unique domain controller. So what we're going to do is we're going to click on Promote this server to a domain controller. In our ADDS configuration wizard, we've got 3 options. We can add a domain controller to an existing domain. We can add a new domain to an existing forest, or we could create a new forest. Well, we can't add to an existing domain because no other domains exist yet. We don't have any forests created yet because we have not created a single domain at all yet. This is what that would look like. And we could choose for it to be a child domain or a tree domain. This is our first domain controller in our first domain, which means that we need to add a new forest. Think of a domain as being a tree. and it's got branches with all the different components. And you can have subdomains and child domains and such. And each one of these domains grouped together creates a forest. Well, first domain controller, and the first domain is the first component in a new forest. So we're going to use one of Microsoft's test domains, and that test domain is a datum.com. So go ahead and type in a datum.com, ADATUM.com, and press enter. It's going to verify that that name's available, and it's going to create that root domain name. It should just take a few moments, and we'll be on our next screen. And there we are. Okay, and now we can select our domain controller options. If we wanted to select a different functional level, we could, and we'll learn about those later. As you can see, it will be a DNS server. It's also going to contain what's called a global catalog, and here again, we're going to learn about that later. For now, we're just setting up our domain. Now, it's still checking everything. Okay, now we need to set a password for the Directory Services Restore Mode, the DSRM. This is a way for us to be able to try to recover our Active Directory if something goes wrong, if something gets corrupted, or we need to restore something. So we're going to use our same password as we used to log in, and that's capital PA11WORD, and click Next. Now it gives us a warning about DNS delegation. Well, the warning says can't be created because authoritative parent zone can't be found. Well, this is our first domain controller, our first DNS server. There is nothing else for it to check. So we're just going to go ahead and click Next. It's going to verify the NetBIOS name. And remember, the NetBIOS name from your Network Plus, it's a shortened name. So what we're going to see is a datum, and as you can see, all caps. We click Next. Now it's going to verify where is it going to store our database file, our log files, our sysvol folder. And we can accept those default paths and click Next. Here we can review the options that we're going to install. And keep in mind that were you to want to save this as a script for you to be able to customize to automate the installation of new domains, you could simply click View Script and save this file as a PowerShell script. And you could modify it to be the names that you wanted it to be and use that to deploy new domains. For now, we're just going to go ahead and close that. We click Next. It's going to verify, have we met all the prerequisites for creating this server as a domain controller? It's going to verify those. We should see a couple warnings. One, in fact, will be the DNS about the authoritative zone. Another one about cryptography. But all of our prerequisites should pass, and we'll be able to click Install. So this will just take a few moments. And there we are. All prerequisite checks passed successfully. As we can see, there's the two warnings that I was referring to. The fact that it completed and that they passed. So now we're going to click Install and understand this warning right here. After we click Install, once the installation is complete, the server will automatically reboot. So be aware that you're going to see a blue banner when you're done saying that's prompting you that the server will reboot. So let's go ahead and click Install. And we'll be able to see the operation, and what it's going to do is it's going to create our Active Directory partition. It's going to create all the objects that go into that partition, and you'll learn about what all those things are as we go through our course. Don't sweat it for now. It's also going to create the DNS components. It's also going to install the Group Policy Management Console, among other things. So it's getting ready to start, and we'll see that progression in just a moment. And there we can see it's checking to see if the Group Policy Management Console needs to be installed, and of course it does, because This is a brand new server, so it's going to go ahead and do that, and you'll be able to watch it go through. I see there it's creating partition 1585 objects left. About 1,600 different objects need to be created yet, and down to 900. Oh, already done. That part of it's done. That part of it's done. And setting our policies, setting the computer name to root to datum.com, securing our Kerberos policy. Now it's configuring our DNS, and you'll see the same thing. It should be done in just a few moments, and then it's going to reboot, and I'm going to pause the video. Okay, well then I don't have to do that. There you can see there's our warning. It's going to reboot in just a minute, and when it comes back up, we'll be able to log in as the domain administrator, and since this is our first domain controller and our first domain, that account will also be an enterprise administrator. So be very careful when you're creating a new environment. Understand that that first domain administrator account is also the enterprise administrator. So if you're creating a multi-domain forest, that first account has the rights to everywhere. It not only owns the keys to the castle, it owns the keys to the kingdom. So what I would recommend is you take that administrator account, and what's the first thing that a hacker is going to go after? They're going to look for default credentials. So what you want to do is you want to right click, and we'll take a look at this as we go through the course. But what you want to do is you want to right click on that administrator account. You want to copy. Now that doesn't copy the administrator name. It doesn't copy a phone number or an address or things like that. But what it does copy is the permissions. It allows us to duplicate the administrator account and the access that it has. And we can then set it to a name that's abstract or more reflective of what we want it to be, as well as securing it with a complex, long password. And I stress the word long because remember, complexity defeats the human aspect, length defeats the computer hacker. In the world of our computers, they understand zeros and ones. No matter what we see on the screen, it all boils down to interpreting that code as a 0 or 1 in the base machine code. So applying complexity confuses the human element. Applying length to a password makes it exponentially more complicated and time consuming for a computer to be able to calculate all possible iterations of that password. So that's why we always stress that technically length is stronger than complexity. But since most of our accounts we expose, that is, like your Amazon.com account or your account to log into your email, these are exposed accounts. You want to set not only complexity but also length. Okay, I'm going to pause this while this finishes up its functions of creating itself as a domain controller, because this could take a few minutes. And I will meet you as soon as I'm ready to log in as the domain administrator. Okay, so our system has rebooted and we're ready to log in as domain administrator. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to click that Control-Alt-Delete button there at the top of your screen. And we can see there's a datum/administrator. We're going to go ahead and we're going to log in with our same password, that PA11WORD, and we're going to set up our new administrator account on the domain. Should just take a moment for Server Manager to come up. And there we are. And if we come back over to local server, click local server there on your left column. Once this loads up there, we can see instead of saying workgroup, it now says a datum.com. Now, we've got a couple things that we need to do to finish setting this up as our domain controller. So what I want everyone to do is I want you to click Tools, and then I want you to go down to DNS, and this will open up the DNS server console. This allows us to manage our DNS settings. We're going to make that a little bit larger, easier to view. We'll go ahead and move that center bar over. Select your domain controller, and then click the caret. That's that little arrow. That's called a caret. Select that, and then expand. Click on the caret for forward lookup zones. Select the datum.com. There we can see our one host record for our one system that's in our network. Go ahead and expand the caret to the left of reverse lookup zones. So now we selected reverse lookup zones. Let's go ahead and right click on it. We're going to create a reverse lookup zone. And select new zone, and we click next. We're going to create a primary zone that gets updated on this server. We click next. It can be replicated to any DNS server on this domain. We click next. It's going to be an IPv4. We click next. And now what's our network ID? Well, what's our subnet? We have a Class B subnet. So the network portion of our IP address is what? 172.16. That's the network ID for our network. Go ahead and type that in. It should be 172.16. Click next. Now we're only going to allow secure dynamic updates because this is integrated into our Active Directory. So we want to keep that setting. That's our most secure setting. Click next and click finish. Now we've got a reverse lookup zone. Notice that there are two records that are created automatically. Only two records that are created automatically, in fact. The start of authority and the name server record. Let's go back over to datum.com under our forward lookup zones. See your host record for your LUN DC1? Let's go ahead and double click on that. And I want you to select Update Associated Pointer Record, PTR, and click OK. Now, go back to your reverse lookup zone and refresh that. You just click the little swirly, or you can just press F5. And there is our reverse lookup. What this does is this allows us to resolve an IP address to a host name, of course, and then the host name to the IP address. So we can do a forward lookup and we can do a reverse lookup. We're done with our DNS for now. Let's go ahead and close that. And now we have a domain controller. We have our DNS server. Let's click on Tools again. Notice that list got a lot longer. Look at all these different Active Directory feature consoles that we have to work with. And then down here, Group Policy Management. There's a lot more things that have been added to that list. For now, though, we've got one more thing to do. We need to complete our DHCP setup. So we're going to select that yellow triangle and we're going to click Complete DHCP Configuration. This is our post-installation configuration wizard, and this will create security groups and it'll authorize the DHCP server on this target computer. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to click Next, and we're going to use our credentials to do this, and we click Commit. And just that easy, the post-installation configuration wizard is completed. Let's click Close. Well, so our DHCP is set up, but it's not configured. So let's go back to Tools again. I told you you're going to use this all the time. And we're going to go down, we're going to select DHCP. We're going to create our first scope of IP addresses that can be handed out. So here again, I'm going to make my console a little bit larger. I'm going to move that left vertical bar over a little bit, make it easier to see. I'm going to click on my domain controller. I'm going to click on IPv4, and then I'm going to right click on IPv4 and select New Scope. The New Scope wizard starts, and we can just click Next. Let's name our new scope for IP assignment to be a datum, simply a datum, and click Next. And now we're going to define the available IP addresses. And let's set that a range to 172.16.0.160. That's 160. And let's make our ending address 172.16.0.190. You'll see that in your instructions as well. And our DHCP wizard says, hey, that's a Class B address range. Do you want to use a Class B subnet length of 16 bits? Well, so that matches our subnet. So we're going to say yes. Let's go ahead and just click Next. Do we want to add an exclusion? See, if we wanted to, we could do the full range. We could go from 172.16.0.1 all the way up to 172.16.255.254. Because remember, you can't use your first and last IP addresses. Remember that? And then we could say, well, we want to exclude a certain range of addresses that we're going to use for static IP assignment. We've restricted the range that we're going to hand out, so we don't need to do any exclusions. So just go ahead and click Next. Typical standard lease duration is 8 days. We're just going to leave that the way it is. Click Next. We do want to configure some options. So the options are specific configurations for the scope. So let's go ahead and click Next. And under router, normally we would specify our gateway. We don't have a gateway to get to the internet, so just simply leave that empty and click Next. It does, however, see the name of our domain and our DNS server. So we want that. Let's go ahead and accept that and click Next. We're not going to do a Win server, so simply leave it empty and click Next. And yes, we want to activate this scope now, so click Next and click Finish. And there is our new scope. And we can see our address pool here. We can see if there's any address leases. Of course, there are none yet. We could take an address lease and right click on it and turn it into a reservation so that would simulate a static assignment without the client computer having to have a static IP assignment. Here we can see our scope options. There's our DNS server, our DNS domain name. Now, one note, if we were going to create multiple scopes, multiple IPs to be handed out, say for various subnets, but they all were going to be part of our datum.com domain, and they were all going to point to the same DNS servers, we could create those as a server option. And then you don't need to create individual specific scope options. Scope options are specific only for that scope that it's being created for. Server options apply to all scopes. Be very careful if you do utilize that, because keep in mind, it will apply to all your scopes. Okay, we're done with DHCP. We've got our domain controller. We've got DNS. We can hand out IP addresses that will allow our member computers to connect to our domain controller. Let's go ahead and get our other systems going. I'm going to select LUN SVR1 right there on the top. I don't have to go back to the lab view to do this. I'm going to click Power On. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to select LUN SVR2, and I'm going to click Power On. And I'm going to click on LUN SVR3 and click Power On. Now, all three of these servers are starting and setting up at the same time. So maybe that pulls a little bit more resources and takes a little bit longer than doing one at a time. But if it takes me 5 minutes to set up each server individually, and it takes me 10 minutes to do all three servers, I've saved myself 5 minutes of time. Well, you know what? I like to save time. I don't like to take longer to do things than I have to. So I'm just going to leave these run. It's going to take a few minutes for these to set up, and you can see number 2 is getting its devices ready. Number 1, I'm sure, is doing the same thing. These are going to take a few more minutes for them to set up, though they're going to go through their installation, getting the devices ready, and then you're going to see them reboot. And then eventually all three will come up and be able to be logged on. And we're going to be logging on using the local administrator account. Now, I'm going to pause the video while the setup goes on. You don't need to sit here and watch the same thing that you'll be watching on your screen when you're doing the process. Okay, I'll be back as soon as we're ready to log on. Okay, SVR1 is up. Let's go ahead and get logged in. And as I said, we're going to be logging in as the local administrator because these are brand new systems. They're standalone servers right now. They're not part of our network yet. But we're going to use those same credentials, PA11WORD. I'm going to go ahead and click on SVR2 and let's see if we can get logged in on that. Yes, we can. Let's go ahead and do this. Get used to accomplishing more than one task at once. Just be certain to take your time. For example, I typed in the password incorrectly. Take your time. Be as efficient as possible. Do it once. Do it right. But we can log into all these. We can have their server managers getting set up so that when we're ready and we've configured our first one, we can simply switch to SVR2, do its configuration and join to the domain, then jump back over here to server 3 and do its configuration and join it to our domain. So as you can see, taking a few extra minutes, it's still logging in. Oh, hey, look at that, at datum.com. It got an IP address from our DHCP server. So it already knows about our network. It knows about our domain. We're going to go ahead and we're going to click yes. We'll see the server manager start up here in just a moment. Let's go to SVR2. See if we see, yep, we see the same thing there. So it's got a valid IP address. Let's go over to SVR3 and see if it's doing the same thing. Well, it's just come up and there it is. Click that, yes. And we're going to go back to SVR1. Let's see if our server manager came up yet. It's starting up. So while these server managers start up, well, okay, I was going to say I was going to pause, but I guess there's no point in that. Let's maximize server manager, get that up on our screen. It's still loading. See that blue bar going across there? That means that server manager is still loading. So while that's doing that, we want to just be patient. We want to make sure that that finishes loading. And as you see, now it's done. Let's take a look at SVR2, see if it's done. It has finished loading, and SVR3, and it's still loading, but by the time we get back to it, it'll be ready to go. And we're back to run SVR1. Yep, and we're playing round robin. Now, why is there a service that didn't respond? That's what that red means. Well, downloaded Maps Manager, don't worry about it. Just hit cancel. We can ignore that. Click on local server on your left-hand column, and we can see our IP address that's been assigned via DHCP. Let's go ahead and select that network connection. And we can see, yep, right there's our datum.com. First thing we want to do is let's go ahead and rename it. Just good practice. Private. In fact, I'm going to do it correctly. I'm going to use a capital on my P just to make it look proper. Hey, I could have sworn. Yep, there it is. Okay. We're going to select status. Let's take a look at our IP assignment. It got our first available address. It looks like everything's good to go. It got our DHCP server assignment. Remember this, 172.16.0.10. That's our DHCP server, because we're going to now convert this to a static IP address. Go ahead and right-click on your network connection, select Properties, double-click IPv4, and select Use the following IP address. This is our first member server. Its IP address is going to be 172.16.0.21. Go ahead and hit Tab. It says, hey, this is a Class B. Do you want to use a Class B subnet? Yes, we do. Go ahead and hit Tab again. We're going to leave the default gateway empty. We don't need that to communicate on our network. That allows us to get out to other networks. Hit tab once more and tab again and type in 172.16.0.10 for our DNS server. Click OK, click OK, and close network connections. Now let's go up here to the center top and refresh our local server. Should take only a moment. There's our private name for our network connection and our IP address. We're ready to join this to our domain. So we can click either on the computer name or workgroup. They're going to take us to the same window. And under System Properties, right here in the middle right-hand side, click Change. We are going to rename the computer and join it to our domain in one step. So let's go ahead and type in lun-svr1 as the computer name and select domain as the member of. And we're going to type in our datum.com right there. Let's go ahead and click OK. It should communicate with our domain controller and ask, hey, who has permissions to join to this domain? Well, right now we've only got our administrator account, so let's go ahead and put that in. And our capital PA11WORD to authenticate. Should take a moment, and there we are. Welcome to the datum.com domain. We've joined our first computer to our new domain. Going to get a prompt saying, hey, you got to restart for this to take effect. Yes, we do. We're going to click close, and we're going to get a prompt that will allow us to restart immediately. Right now, yes, click restart now. While that's restarting, let's go over to SVR2, and we're going to do the same thing. We're going to go to local server. We're going to click on the network connection. We're going to right-click that network connection and rename. And what are we going to rename it to? That's correct, private. Press enter. Right-click, left-click on properties, double-click on IPv4, use the following address. This is server number 2, so it's going to be .22. So 172.16.0.22. We hit tab, we accept the subnet, we hit tab, 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 type in your DNS server name, 172.16.0. What is it? .10, yes. Go ahead and click OK. And click OK, and close your network connections. Let's go ahead and refresh that server manager once more. Make sure that, yep, there's private and there's our IP address. We can click either on Broward and the name of the computer or workgroup. I'm going to click the name that time. See, it brings you to the same screen. Click the change button and let's name this lun-svr2 member of what? A datum.com, and click OK. Connects to our domain controller and says, who has permissions to join to this domain? Well, right now, again, we're using the administrator credentials. Go ahead and type that in and the password, and we should join to the domain. There we are. We're going to get a warning telling us that we need to restart to apply the changes. We click close and restart now, and away we go. Yep, we're going to LUN server 3. Click local server, click the network connection, right click and rename, press enter, right click and select properties, double click IPv4 and say use the following address, 172.16.0.20, yes, 23. We can hit tab a few times, can't we? Tab, 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 tab. Type in your DNS server name, 172.16.0. What is it? What is it? .10, yes. Click OK. Click OK. We can close our network connections. We can refresh. Private, yep, .23. Let's go ahead and get this joined to our network. We're going to rename it lun-svr3. We're going to make it a part of our domain, a datum.com, and click OK. And there we are, administrator and password. Click OK. Welcome to the datum.com domain. Yep, we got to restart, we know. Go ahead and click close and restart now. And if we come back now to our lun-dc1, been a while since we were there. Let's go ahead and log in there. Logging in as our domain administrator. Let's look at one of those Active Directory tools. Go up to the top right to Tools and select Active Directory Users and Computers. This is where we manage our user accounts and computer accounts. Expand the datum.com domain and click on Domain Controllers. There's our lun-dc1, and we can see the global catalog that's installed there. Click on Computers. There are our 3 member servers that we've joined. We've got a 4-server network. This concludes your setup instructions. We're ready to begin our lessons and labs. Thank you for viewing this video.